Hi, everyone, and welcome. So we're getting started with the ecosystem here in New York. If you don't know, we're not just wearing the party hats for fun, except for me, I'm wearing it just for fun. But it is the 3rd birthday of Kubernetes. Woo! I was going to have everyone sing happy birthday to Kubernetes, but I was told that that was tacky, so.
She heard me sing and then changed her mind.
Thank you for bearing with us through the fire alarm this morning. If we're missing any important safety announcements, I'm sure someone will let us know after this. So this is a panel. I'm here with Brent Langston, who's one of the developer advocates for containers here at AWS. This is Dan Kohn, who's the executive director of the CNCF, and Justin Graham, who's senior manager for containers, also here at AWS. My name is Abby. I'm an evangelist here at AWS also. So 3 AWS folks and 1 CNCF folk. Without further ado, we have a couple of questions for them. This will be a really short panel, and then we'll follow this with demos and a workshop from all of some exciting partners. So first off, I'm going to pass one to Dan. What is the CNCF, and how does it work with Kubernetes?
Hi, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, or CNCF, is a nonprofit open source software foundation. And our job is to host open source software projects and to provide them resources and marketing and some governance help and other things to help them be successful. And so Kubernetes is the anchor tenant of CNCF. We formed around it in a lot of ways 2.5 years ago. But we're now actually up to 23 different projects. And so what we find is that as most enterprises adopt Kubernetes, they often need a monitoring solution and find that Prometheus works great, and a logging solution, FluentD, and tracing, Jaeger, and more and more. And so we provide those services. We're part of the Linux Foundation, and we're sisters to a lot of other big software foundations.
I feel like what's cool there is that something that comes up for most people, right, is that they get started and they start building with one of these projects, and literally almost always the next follow-up question is, how am I supposed to pick the tools that I'm supposed to use? And people like the CNCF are making recommendations for the tools that maybe might help you solve some of the problems so that you don't have to kind of sort through the whole ecosystem without any guidance.
Yeah, I'll give a quick shout out here. There's a website, the CNCF Interactive Landscape at l.cncf.io. And at the top of that, there's a link for the trail map. And this is the idea that as you're going on this cloud-native journey, there's a lot of choices you can make along the way. Now, key piece is you don't need to pick the CNCF project at every step along the way. There's a lot of choice in the ecosystem. There's paid commercial services that are alternatives or implement a lot of those technologies. But our hope is that you'll at least consider our hosted technologies and have a sort of informed reason on why you're picking something else, maybe an internal project or a commercial one.
So we heard a little bit about the role of the CNCF. Justin, do you think you could tell us a little bit about the role that AWS is trying to play in the Kubernetes community?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know from talking to a lot of our customers, and a lot of which are in this room and on the stream, that Kubernetes is important to them. It's really helping them with their software development and operations. So we want to make sure that AWS is a great place to run Kubernetes. So we did just launch our Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes not that long ago, which is a managed Kubernetes service on AWS that can make life a lot easier to run Kubernetes. But as part of that process to get that service launched, we made a lot of upstream contribution into the project and worked with the community to ensure that things like other AWS service integration to Kubernetes were upstream into the project. We also worked with the Kubernetes project to ensure that EKS reached Kubernetes conformance in April before we launched. So as a customer, you can feel comfortable that if you're used to using Kubernetes or you're using Kubernetes on-prem or elsewhere, that EKS will work the same way. And moving forward, we actually have an engineering team within AWS that solely works on upstream contribution and with the community to make sure that customers like yourselves can continue to run Kubernetes easily and in a great way on AWS.
Awesome. Hey, Dan, I was wondering, how does an idea go from idea all the way to production? How do we get features out into Kubernetes?
So the answer is that it's complicated and there's a lot of steps involved. The Kubernetes community is arguably the third largest distributed project in the history of humankind. So number one is Wikipedia, number two is Linux. But in terms of the number of people spread all across the world who are coordinating, Kubernetes would be third. And so the way that's organized is that there are 30 different special interest groups. SIG AWS is certainly one of them and an important one, but there's Node and security and user interface things, all sorts of other elements. And those each control part of the code. And then independent people, often from companies like AWS or from enterprises, generally that they either see a bug or that there's some feature that's missing or some itch they want to scratch, propose code, suggest it, it gets reviewed by the SIG, and often that's a long process where they say, no, you're not following our guidelines here, oh, you're not interacting with these APIs correctly. But eventually that code gets packaged up and then pulled together, and every 3 months, Kubernetes creates a new release. We just had 1.11 a couple weeks ago, which is by far the biggest release yet. I don't have all the statistics, but it's 3,000 people working together on it. And then another part that's incredibly important is those releases and those new software features come with a set of conformance tests. And so when Justin mentioned that EKS is a conformant and a certified Kubernetes, that's a critical piece for enterprise users to know that the functionality they depend on is going to be the same between all those certified Kubernetes implementations.
You know, that actually brings up an interesting point. If you aren't on top of the community and understanding fully what it is, you might not really understand the difference between EKS and Kubernetes. So Justin, maybe what is the difference between EKS and Kubernetes?
That's a great question, Brent. Let's talk a little bit about that. So, I mean, the base answer is there really isn't a difference. You know, EKS, and I guess we sort of skipped over the acronym. EKS stands for Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes, so they are the same thing. In case we didn't bridge that, but EKS is a managed Kubernetes service, so it's 100% upstream Kubernetes, no forking involved, et cetera. So if you run Kubernetes on premise or you run Kubernetes on EC2, which we know a lot of customers do, a lot of folks do, and then you want to have someone else manage the masters and etcd for you, then you can use EKS. So if you're using tools like FluentD or Prometheus with Kubernetes, you know, on EC2 or on-prem, you can use those tools with EKS as well. So there is meant to be and really is no difference between the two other than we manage the masters and etcd on your behalf. But what we did do in that realm is we did some work with the community to ensure that we could provide you a highly available multi-AZ set of masters and etcd so you can ensure that your applications that are running on Kubernetes stay available to your customers or your stakeholders as much as possible.
And let me just interject there for folks new to the space that etcd we think of as the brain of Kubernetes. So it's the distributed key value store that's containing all the state for the rest of the software.
Awesome.
So I have one that I think is for both of you and for all of us here, because I think that what's made Kubernetes so popular and so strong has been the community. So since we're all here at a Kubernetes community event, what are some other ways that we could get involved, either with the SIG groups or with the community or with contributing or with making some of these cool open source tools that everyone else can use? How can I get involved?
So I'm going to hit 3 of those. The first one is you can go to kubernetes.io and start learning about it, play around with it, and then look at the contributing section. And we're really very eager to have new contributors. We have a whole onboarding process. We have a user's mailing list. We have support processes for that. Often the way that people get started is that they're just teaching themselves and they see some bug in the documentation or a typo or something that's just slightly out of date or doesn't work right in their environment. And it's really not that hard to create a pull request and then fix that. And it's a very satisfying feeling when you do it. And often after you start documentation, then you see something in the code and you say, oh, here's a small change. And so we do have a whole set of issues that are specifically labeled as good beginner issues if you want to get started. But two other parts I'll mention is that cncf.io hosts Kubernetes, a number of other projects. We're very eager to add to our end user community. And so you can go to cncf.io/end user. We have 57 amazing companies there now. We're looking to add more. And then my last one is we run the biggest Kubernetes-focused event of the year, KubeCon Cloud Native Con. It's going to be in Shanghai, November 14th and 15th, and in Seattle, December 11th to 13th. There's a Contrib Summit the day before where you can get even more involved, and so we'd love to see many of you there.
And just one last on that one, if you do run Kubernetes on AWS, either managing your own control plane or through EKS, there is SIG, Special Interest Group AWS. If you're really passionate about making Kubernetes or AWS a better place to run Kubernetes, and you have ideas on how to do that, would encourage you to do that. Check that out.
So we are just about out of time for the panel part of the morning. So Dan, Justin, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks.
For those of you that are here in person, it'll be just Brent and I for a second, and then we'll be back up in just a few minutes with our first demo.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the day.